The Open Therapy Institute is addressing bias in mental health care. Go to our website, opentherapyinstitute.org. We have CE credit workshops about overlooked issues in the field. You can go to our workshop page and register now and become a member. And for those looking for a therapist, we match people with someone who's highly skilled and truly open. Just contact us through the contact page on the website or email us at info@opentherapyinstitute.org. Hello, I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and I'm speaking with Dr. Andrew Hartz of the Open Therapy Institute. And Andrew, I am excited to hear what you have to talk about today.
Thanks. Good to talk as always. Well, as you know, I've been working for over a year, maybe like a year and a half on a book. And it's I think it's related to a lot of different things that are on people's mind, like the search for meaning, a kind of crisis of meaning and direction. I think the ways that people are wanting to, but maybe struggling to reconnect with faith and spirituality, to understand religion and faith issues. Because I think society's kind of like lost connection to them, and maybe some people are trying to reconnect to that. But other things, like it's also related to other things like AI and the increasing technologization of society and how that impacts people, things like drugs, psychopharm, lots of stuff that are all kind of tied together to a couple of central concepts in psychotherapy, psychology. So they're all kind of like tied together. Um, so basically, the two concepts are secrets and mysteries.
Mm.
And then there's a third related concept of questions. So a secret is something that you can know what it is, but you can't communicate it. So think about trying to explain to a young child what it means to fall in love, what it is to fall in love. Even if you're really, really articulate, the kid isn't gonna understand it because they haven't had that experience. There's a whole interpersonal, emotional, psychological experience that goes with it that they don't have a reference point. So even if you try to describe that stuff really, really well and you're really good at it, there's a gap where they're not going to get it. And you can think about that. There's other things like trying to explain to somebody who's been deaf their whole life what music is like, or somebody who's blind what color is like. And so I think there's different things where you can see where people are limited. But another maybe more mundane example might be like grief. Is like there's people who have had experiences of tragic loss or very deeply felt losses, and there's people who haven't, and it's an experience, and not everybody knows what it's like.
Mhm.
And it's really obvious, like some people know and some people don't. So, but you could get much more fine-tuned with it. Like I think like thinking about something like depression. Like there's a type of depression that is very much like pressure that weighs down on somebody, maybe pushes down on their head and shoulders. And there's another type of depression that's empty and numb. And there's another type of depression that's like painful or heartbroken or tearful. And it can be heavy or cold or fast or slow or like despairing or frantic or there's a lot of different types of depression, and we don't really have words for all of these things. And there's a certain point where there's a line in a Bob Dylan song that I think about a lot. I think it's in It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, whatever that is. Maybe that's the title of the song, but I think he says like he's talking about somebody who's crying like a fire in the sun.
Mm.
And it's like, have you felt that? And my guess is of the audience, maybe some people have, and probably a lot of people haven't. And they're maybe trying to imagine what this experience is, and they're trying to, but and maybe they can kind of get pieces of it, or maybe they can't. But there's a limit of like what of this stuff we can really communicate. If you think about moving away from sadness, think about like different types of laughter and different types of jokes. So like a joke can be raunchy or aggressive or depressive or self-deprecating, and it can feel cathartic. You can feel guilty or gross for laughing. You can feel um it could be disturbing even. Like, so there's all these different types of laughter, these different types of depression, these different types of happiness and anxiety, and we don't even have words for these things. And there's a certain point where you start to reach the limits of language. Like, is there like, you know, um, talking about the different types of depression, is there a type of depression that's like hot depression? Or like, is there a type of depression that's like, uh, maybe that's very sober?
Mm.
I think that there's sometimes people can kind of like maybe imagine them and maybe, but they're struggling to connect. And I think those experiences are happening all the time. Our language is really, really limited. And they happen in all other different types of life. So like we're on Zoom right now. So like what is different about being on Zoom versus being in person? And we can identify some things. Like I can't make eye contact with you. If I look at the camera, I'm not looking at your face. If I'm looking at your face, I'm not looking at the camera. So we can kind of have a simulated eye contact, but it's not really eye contact. Um, I don't feel your physical presence. Sometimes the angles are weird and, I seem shorter than I am or taller than I am, or um, sometimes the rhythms are off, the volume of the voice is off, the spacing is off. Like things aren't, there are ways that but does any of that really matter? I mean, when I'm with a patient in person, I feel like a big way that I'll understand my patients is I feel in my body an emotion that I think they might be feeling. And they might be saying everything's fine, but I'm feeling very anxious all of a sudden. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe this person's anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And but that signal of what they might be feeling is much weaker on Zoom and maybe even misleading. So I think I miss information. But there's kind of like how many of these states of like technological states or missing pieces in technological interaction, like how much of that is new feelings, new interpersonal dynamics, new subtle variations that we're experiencing, but even if we can identify them, it's hard to communicate. We know that being in person is different on Zoom. People fly across the country to visit loved ones. They could just have a chat on Zoom. They know that it's not the same thing. But I think people still struggle to articulate how. And while I do think people will get better at articulating how, um, I'm not sure that they'll ever fully be able to articulate everything that's missing between Zoom and in person because there's these subtle things. I think we're going to develop a whole new vocabulary around this stuff, like new words for different emotions and experiences on technology, on texting, on chatting. We already have some of it, like the idea of ghosting someone
Mm-hmm.
that you can't really do. I mean, I guess maybe if you were writing letters in the 19th century, you could just stop responding and
Mm-hmm.
but it's different. But I think that we're going to develop a whole new vocabulary around new experiences, emotions, dynamics, interpersonal, psychological things that people are feeling that we even if we can identify them, we can struggle to find the words for them. So this is all secrets. Religion is also really full of it. Anybody who meditates or has a practice of prayer, people are likely to have these experiences of like uh, something that's hard to put into words that happened when you were meditating, and maybe it was a feeling of insight or clarity, or you stepped outside of your mind, which doesn't really make sense rationally to say. What does that mean? Like you no, you can't do that, but something happened or something opened up or something unlocked.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, well, no, that's not real, or that's just, or whatever, but people struggle to even know what religious experiences are, um, or meditation experiences are. So I think there's tons of secrets. Mystery, going on to the other, a mystery is something that you can experience but not know. So it's the stuff that's bigger than the mind's ability to conceptualize. So the best metaphor for this is a fish in the ocean. Like the fish can under, it's in the ocean, it's breathing in the ocean, it's swimming in the ocean, it's drinking the water of the ocean, it's surrounded by the ocean, but it can't conceptualize what the ocean is. Its mind can't do that. And because to the fish, the ocean is formless and it's everywhere and it's endless. And so it's a concept that's bigger than the mind.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of this stuff, we might reach our limits of like what we can articulate and what we can even understand about ourselves. But it doesn't mean there's not something happening there.
Mhm.
Like even if we could name, like that's why I'm thinking with technology, like there's probably always going to be a gap of what we can't even understand about what we're missing, this kind of micronutrient, essential human micronutrient that we're being deprived of, that like we know it's not there, but we can't name it. We can't even conceptualize it, but we know it.
Mhm.
And that stuff is really rejected in the modern era. Everything now is about data, evidence, numbers. Show me the study, show me the data, name it, make a rational argument. But if you can't name it and measure it, it's not real.
Right,
Reject
which
it.
is why a lot of studies that we do, especially around the social sciences, seem to be just over engineering a way to talk about something that we already intuitively understand.
Well, and often failing. Like happiness is not um like deep inner fulfillment and peace and satisfaction on a scale of 0 to 10 of happiness. I think that deep inner peace and fulfillment is probably a 5. It's not a 10. There's something where the 10 might be less healthy than the 5.
Mhm.
Like maybe we should be trying to get to 5. And like if we're really healthy and grounded, we'll probably dip into 3 and 4 sometimes, and maybe even 2, and whatever. We're gonna have a range, and
Mhm.
like maybe we'll go up as well. But the ability to actually feel fulfilled is probably not the same as happiness. And I think about a lot of studies in psychology where they're done on college students,
Mhm.
where they're not the most insightful people. They're not the deepest people. They're doing this for course credit. They're filling out these questions quickly. And it's like, how happy or sad are you today? 0 to 10. And they're like, I guess 7. That's the level of depth. So, but we're
And
human
they're
beings,
young.
and they're young and they're not, and even among adults, like who are much older, the level of insight people have into what they're feeling and why and what it means is like hugely varies. And I don't, it's probably correlated with IQ, but it's definitely distinct
Mhm.
ability to like have introspective awareness about yourself. And I just think that like these questionnaires are like the goal is to move the happiness number up. You're going to engage in very different behaviors than if your goal is to get fulfillment and stay at 5.
Mhm.
It's a totally different thing. But fulfillment is going to be much harder to like, I think for a lot of people, can they even conceptualize what connecting to like an ocean of grace and peacefulness is, and to live in that, you know? They're not even thinking about that. They're like, I guess I'm fulfilled. Like my job's okay. There's good TV on. Like I had a decent lunch. I guess I'm fulfilled. That person is rating that the same way or maybe they're getting rated higher than like the enlightened sage
Hmm.
is going to
Hmm.
do it. So it's like, so that was like another, the third concept was a question. And a question is something that you can know and you can communicate, but you can't measure, or you can't measure it well. So there's the secret is the unnameable, a mystery is the unknowable, and a question is the unmeasurable.
Unmeasurable. So
And
secrets being not things that are necessarily withheld because of desire to withhold or compulsion to withhold. It's just the limits of communication. It's limited by the capacity for communication. And then
right,
mystery being limited by the capacity for understanding.
yes.
And will you say a little bit more about questions? The inability to measure. Will you elaborate a little?
Yeah. Well, just like you could think about dynamics and like a defense mechanism is probably a good example where you can say like somebody who's uh repressing a feeling or intellectualizing something, like we kind of have like I think most people can understand what that means and you can talk about it and define it and notice it and see it. But it's very hard to reproduce some of these things in the lab. Maybe
Mhm.
not impossible. And I think especially as like MRI stuff gets better and technology gets better, like I think that our ability to measure some of these defense mechanisms could really enhance.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know whether that'll happen or not, but I think like, but they're notoriously difficult because it's like I have to somehow engineer something that is intolerable to your conscious mind that you'll use a predictable defense about in a predictable way that then I
Mhm.
can measure.
Mhm.
It's very difficult. And sometimes people have come up with really creative studies to measure things like that. And it's like great, but it's like, it's weird that like we kind of can all know what intellectualization is, that you're like avoiding affect and you're getting overly intellectualized about something. People know what that is. I think a lot of people can recognize that they've done it or seen people who've done it. It's not such a necessarily like mystically deep idea, but it's very hard to measure defense mechanisms and reproduce them in the lab in a way that's quantifiable. Um, so I think psychology is just full of questions because the thing that's easy to measure are self-report questionnaires for undergrads about how happy or sad they are, or different, or their self-report about what their personality variables are, and then how they do a mechanical task on a computer. I mean, that stuff's what's easy to measure. So that's what gets measured. And everything outside of that is much harder to measure. So it often gets left out, even if it's not a secret or a mystery.
So then what all of these have in common are their aspects of the human emotional, social, psycho-spiritual experience that sort of defy mechanistic description and understanding.
Yeah, well, I mean, a defense mechanism is very mechanistic,
Hmm.
but it's just not. But it's not measure. We haven't figured out a way to measure it and reproduce
Hmm.
it in a lab yet.
Hmm.
And some of these things might be, it's just simply not ethical or feasible to do it, and maybe it's impossible. Others, maybe if our technology gets better, we'll find a way to do it. But for the time being, it's like nobody's really figured out a good way to demonstrate these things. But I think that the issue is that if we build a society that's based on what's on data, which I think in the current moment in 2024, that's something that people think is trust the science. Everybody agrees science is great. They just want to say their side is on the side of science or something like science is great, data is great. Show me the data, do the science. And I think that there are limits of data and science that really do need to be acknowledged. I'm a very much an empirical person. I there's it if it's an a lot of things that we debate in society are not secrets, mysteries, or questions. They are things that can be falsified and we can study, and we should do that and actually look at the data on it. There are a lot of things like that. But I don't think we can entirely build a functioning society based exclusively on data and exclusively on the nameable and the measurable. And my sense is that if we did, it would actually be out of harmony with who we are in ways that could be really painfully felt, but we don't know how to articulate it. And I think we end up dissociating a lot of it. And it's like a big part of it is obviously like spirituality and faith. Um, but it's other things too about interpersonal connection and relatedness and community and individual depth and meaning. And it's like there's like an attempt almost like with the search for meaning, like it, it, maybe it is about being mechanistic that people it can't you can't really have too mechanistic of an answer to that question of like my purpose is to like build this road or something like it's like I don't know that it'll not be satisfying probably um the real like from a faith-based perspective the real mystery is God and I think people who criticize faith tend to think of religion as a set of hypotheses about the world. That religions posit a set of mechanical hypotheses about the world, and um, there's no evidence for those hypotheses. Therefore, it's dumb.
Mhm.
And that's how they see it. It's kind of it's wild because as somebody who considers myself very spiritual, I don't think I ever thought of religion as about mechanical hypotheses on about the world. There are religious people who see their faith primarily about hypotheses on the world, like 4,000 years ago, this happened or that happened or this. It's like, how could I possibly know that? I can't know that. And I wouldn't debate an atheist about what happened 3,000 years ago or not. I can't know that. Like to me, religion is so much more, faith, I'll say, is so much more about the mystery. So it's fundamentally about this stuff that's outside of language and that's outside of knowledge. And it's about, and like I'd say just to kind of like the in most religions, God is understood through his names, his qualities, and his actions. And they tend to be, the loving, the grace, truth, life, uh, patience, forgiveness, peace, harmony. It's light, it's endless, it's wisdom. These qualities are kind of seen as embedded with each other and existing in a unity that's beyond the mind's ability to conceptualize. And people connect to it through their heart, but it pervades all of everything. And the path of faith is about connecting to this power, the light within the mystery and within the inner heart, and letting it teach your body and your thoughts and your actions about those qualities. And it can heal and guide and protect. And it's an experiential thing. And it's not going to fit in the mechanical, data-based worldview because you know, you can do self-report and be like, does your religion make you feel better? And people say, yeah. And it's not really persuasive evidence to those people. But is there, what's happening here? Um, so I think that I think that it's not, even among people with religious faith, I think they're too often falling into a trap of like, think claiming that they know things they don't know and trying to take a stance that they know everything. That's not, to me, faith is the opposite. It's about not knowing. I remember the story of Job is a really, really powerful story here, where after Job's suffering, God goes to Job, and Job finally gets to ask him, why did this have to happen? Why did this happen? And God responds with a question. He says, well, you see how the stars are each in different places in the sky? Like, why did we put them there? And Job says, I don't know. And he says, well, do you see how there's different animals and beasts in the sea and in the forests, and they have different shaped bodies and different like behaviors? And why did we make them in the forms that they have? He says, I have no idea. And God says, that's exactly right. You don't know. You can connect to the grace of good qualities that come from your faith and your connection to God and that power. But the why is something that belongs to God. And that understanding, that appreciation of the mystery, that there is this power and these good qualities that we can still connect to and still be nourished by amidst the mystery. That in some Bibles, you'll see it called the wisdom of Job, the wisdom of not knowing, which was, and by the way, that's the same as like Plato's, Socrates' wisdom. His wisdom was, I don't know. He was the wisest person because he was the one who knew he didn't know. And so there is a long-standing tradition in faiths around the world of the mystery being really, really essential. When you get to the place of I know, you're off. You're already took a wrong turn. Um, so it's about, I don't think for me, faith is not about I know. It's about connecting to a power that's beyond your mind's ability to know. And it's about that connection. Um, so I think that this is like I think people need to maybe reappreciate like this is the value of faith. Like this power is something that can be of great benefit to people, but it's a long and arduous path to connect to dig down and have a firm connection to this and to imbibe it and soak it into your body and your thoughts and your actions. It's a practice. And a lot of the things that are put in practices around the world about how to do this, they're not necessarily logical. It's things like abstain from intoxicants, pray a certain number of times a day, have a regular practice of prayer, study these stories, have a certain diet, certain rituals, certain holy languages or texts. There's these things in there that are like, well, why should that work? Why should this one prayer be more powerful than just one that I make up on my own? It's like, because that prayer came from the mystery. That prayer can guide you there. The one you make up yourself is going to come from your ego. These are here to help you. These practices are here to help you. But to the modern mind, I think they just seem like arbitrary, archaic things. And it's like, well, show me the data. But how could you possibly get data on this? It's not measurable. It has no form. So I think like this is really, really important for so many different aspects of society where it's like, what leads to fulfillment? That's something therapists are thinking about. I don't really know how people can find fulfillment without a connection to something like this, to connection to this. And and then there's the question of like AI. Like, what is AI getting wrong? Like, there's something, the scary thing to me about AI is its lack of connection to the mystery. Every nameable, measurable thing it has,
Mhm.
it's missing one piece, this piece. That scares me. That's a type of intelligence that's not like other types of intelligence.
Mhm.
Um, but also things like, like what do we need in society? Like what like we do need direction and stability and meaning. And I think some way of having a connection to the mystery. Historically, that's been through faith and been through religion. And there's been a way of honoring things that don't necessarily have a rational explanation of you do A because you want B, reasoning to it. But it's like there are these traditions and practices and that are can put society in harmony with it. I think societies that lose touch with this, everything makes sense and nothing works. It's like everything is optimized in terms of the data, and like people are like miserable or suffering in like more and more unusual and bizarre ways, and things are thrown out of harmony with each other. And I think it can be like a weird type of dystopia where everything is logical and measurable, and everything that's not is destroyed. And it's like that's hell. Like that's like a hellish world. Um, so. I'm kind of monologuing. I'm not sure where you want to. I mean, I see people struggling for this language and for a sense of direction here. And I think to both appreciate, like, for therapists to like be able to like have an appreciation for faith and a connection to faith, it's like really important to have a way of like appreciating what that is. And I think a lot of therapists who are atheists or agnostic, they think, oh, you have accepted some hypotheses about factual events from ancient history, and I don't accept those hypotheses. But I guess they make you feel better, so that's fine. Like, I think that's the way that like atheist therapists or maybe atheists in general think about it. Like, as long as you're not doing something crazy, that's fine.
Mhm.
But even people religious, like nobody who has a practice that's really connected to this power, um, you're not gonna blow up, you're not gonna commit terrorism. Like I think there are obviously people who do horrific things in the name of religion. That's, but are they're not connected to this. So whatever they're praying to, it's something else, you know. And Um, but I mean, I think there's tons to say about this, so I'll kind of
Mhm.
pause. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I have so many thoughts. I think
Okay.
this is I love the way you're putting this together. And something that I notice is that you aren't singling out one religion as having the answers. You're talking about a sense of spiritual connection, a connection to God, however one sees that. So it's a more general, more open, just just a recognition of this mysterious force that's between all the gaps of our understanding or our capacity.
Yeah, I have a memory of seeing a painting by a Renaissance master that I cannot identify. I can't find it, but I have a memory of seeing this painting, and it's a painting of Jesus, and he's doing this.
I can't see. What is it?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, the
Let me
hand. Okay.
yeah, I'll have to
Uh-huh.
adjust my camera. Yeah. So he has his
Okay.
finger like this.
Hmm.
Okay. And one one meaning here
Hmm.
is the finger. Like is to like attend sometimes people do this in meditation. You pay attention to what you feel in your hands
Hmm.
to start. But another is he's holding it at his heart. So the point of the teaching is the heart.
Hmm.
But another meaning is that he's pointing towards the face and the
Hmm.
light in the face that comes from the heart. And another meaning is he's pointing above all of that, beyond the self,
Hmm.
you know. And I think that there's something about uh, remembering that what matters is the truth and not getting too distracted by the symbols that are meant to reflect that truth. Um, because I think, again, I think that that ends up separating you. You want to keep going deeper to the richer and richer meanings, in your faith. And there's always kind of a form that we end up creating in our mind and mistaking that for the power. But you
Mm-hmm.
want to kind of look up the next step so that you can keep progressing. And I worry, I think it's a big it can be a real distraction to be too preoccupied with um the external form instead of the truth.
Mm-hmm. Were you always spiritual, or did you have a time in your life when you went away from it or didn't have it and came back to it?
No, I was a spiritual kid, and I had the thirst for the ocean uh at a as a child. Um, and it's weird to be spiritual in this era because I do think it's rare for somebody who really takes faith very seriously. Um, there are people who are very observant religiously, and there's like I don't know, I don't want to be too disparaging of other people's practices. I think there's a lot of atheists, a lot of agnostics, a lot of people who don't care. I think there's a lot of people who are focused more on the external stuff. And it's rare for me to encounter people who are very spiritual. I'm like, this is I take it very seriously. It's a very intense part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't encounter people like that often.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. One of the first examples that you were giving when you were talking about secrets was trying to explain to a child what it means to fall in love.
Yeah.
And I was, it's like you're reading my mind because I was just thinking about this yesterday, about trying to explain this to my son, who's 13 now, and
Mm.
he's a young 13. So, he's got in his friend group, you can see some of the boys are starting to definitely go through the change, and some of the girls have already, and then some of the kids still look like little kids, and he still looks like a little kid, and he still sounds like a little kid, and his understanding still seems to be there. And I was thinking, should I, and how do we talk about this thing that's going to happen to him? It's going to be this force is going to come over you, and you're going to start to see people differently, and that passion that you have for things in your life,
Yeah.
you're going to find that passion gets directed at someone, and it's going to be the most powerful thing that you've ever felt. And I'm thinking, like, how do I talk about this to a kid? How do I express this? And as you're talking about these things, I'm also thinking in my own life, I've had this experience of revisiting, like, everything, all of the mysteries, if you will, all the things, the big topics of life. It's like as life unfolds, there's not necessarily more things that are important. They're just the same things, but they become important differently. And I feel like there's a deepening. Like, I could say to 8-year-old me some of the things that I believe now about life, death, and love. An 8-year-old me would understand, but
Mm.
not the way I understand it now. And I could say it to 17-year-old me, and she wouldn't quite get it the same way, but she'd think she got it. She would really
Right,
understand.
right,
And
right.
24-year-old me, and likewise me now in my 40s, I probably don't understand the same way that I'll understand these same things if I get to live another 40 years. And so it's
Yes.
like this just continual deepening of the same things
Yes.
unlock and open more and more.
Well, and there's like that painting of like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the great thing about some of these religious traditions is their ability to have these unfolding layers of meaning. There was this was a saying when I lived in India for about 6 months, but I remember there was a saying that if there was a truly enlightened master who was teaching a crowd of even 1,000 people, the discourse that he gave would give the exact perfect answer to the question of all 1,000 people were asking.
Mm.
And, when you think about that rationally, you're like, well, that's impossible. Um, but there's something about when you speak from the depths of the heart that it can have these multiple meanings. And you hear this that, the divinely revealed texts, the divine revelations are different traditions a little bit. They have 10,000 meanings or 70,000 meanings and and the meanings are constantly unfolding. And you might read a passage and there's a very idiosyncratic worldly resonance with some specific thing that you're happening, or there's a deep theological point, or there's a deeper theological point, or there's a something that's more psychological or emotional, and there are these layers of these meanings. What does it mean? Um, when you think about stories in the Bible, like maybe like the burning bush or something, is a great image that's of that nature. Um, and what is the burning bush? And it's again, these layers of meaning that are constantly unfolding. And when people say they know the answer, it's like you're that's such a that's a boulder in your path to
Mhm.
getting to the next place. And it's like maybe you do need to kind of absorb that for a little while, but then you gotta keep moving
Mhm.
and it'll keep unfolding. Um, but there's something I think that because our society is so secularized, people are kind of forgetting how to do this. And it leads to like, I mean, I get a lot of like, I don't know why, it must be because I'm like curious about it and I clicked a couple, but I get a lot of like atheism videos in my YouTube. But I find them so frustrating because I'll find that atheists are basically arguing that the hypotheses that religion posits have not shown evidence with any data. And that tends to be their main thing. Or there's these things that are in scripture that are inexplicable according to the most superficial, worldly based analysis. Um, and if you say, oh, it's a metaphor for something, you're just like trying to excuse that it was really dumb
Mhm.
because, people in the past didn't use metaphors. And they didn't have that capacity, I guess. So if you think they're using a metaphor, then you're just trying to defend how dumb they were by making something up that's BS. I just
Mhm.
like that seems to be the essence of it. Um and then I'll see the person who's like debating them and they're kind of like conceding all of that and going and making some like strange I don't know why they're not actually talking about how there's a truth here that has value and focus on that. And like you don't need to have the answer to explain every little scripture that's associated with every religion. Like just don't even worry about that. But um focus on what you're actually there to get. You don't have to pretend that you know how the universe was created. We don't even know where we came from. Like, I just feel like we don't know how we were created. How are we going to know how the universe is created?
Mhm.
So I don't know. To me, or I guess how where consciousness was created,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, I do think like spirituality is more about those mysterious things, consciousness, being alive, being agentic, being sentient, being a being, grace, the mystery, the light. Those are the things that, because I think the scientific or the overly data focused argument is like, well, we can't measure any of those things. So let's just assume those aren't real. And then if we make those assumptions, then we,
Hmm.
move forward into something. But I really don't think that that world will work for people.
Hmm.
Um,
I like how you're finding this uniting thread that brings together all these different aspects of modern life that are uh I guess particularly mm, it's a crisis of meaning, as you say, like we are finding ourselves in this really painful place culturally and socially, and for so many reasons that seem disparate, but when you kind of bring it together in this framework, um, one of the things that I've thought about is how the mechanistic worldview, this data-driven, empirical, scientific, technological worldview, it it kind of leaves no room for life itself. And so something I've been sort of trying to find the uniting thread for, or articulate a uniting thread for, is how the way that things are going, we've got a completely consent-based sexual morality at this point
mm,
that's taken hold, where it's just fine to commodify sexual experience. That's becoming a norm right now. At the same
right.
time as we also have been promoting so heavily this last election cycle to abortion, not just in the most extreme cases of difficulty, but just because it's a right and you should be able to do that. And so that's a devaluation of sexuality and then a devaluation of conception. And then we also have the promotion of assisted suicide and euthanasia at the same time, which is the 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 being able to, as human beings, make a calculus about when life becomes too inconvenient or too difficult, and so we should
Mm,
just cut it off. And so all these things at the same time, and when during COVID there was the great suppression of life in order to prioritize other
mm,
life.
mm.
And I guess I wonder how are all of these things united? What brings all these together? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the big piece, the big picture
Mm,
here is that I think the modern psyche is very preoccupied with the machine metaphor.
mm,
And just to think back about psychology, like some of the earliest models of the mind were that the mind is like a chariot.
mm,
Plato said the mind's like a chariot, and like the Bhagavad Gita, I think they say the mind's like a chariot.
mm,
And that metaphor makes sense because at that time, a chariot was the most sophisticated technology they had.
mm,
So it's a way to represent like different parts working together and like it's mechanical. And in the Enlightenment period in Europe, um, the main metaphor that took over was the clock.
mm,
And you see that clock metaphor, not only the mind is a clock, but the body is a clock, society is a clock, the universe is a clock. God is the clockmaker.
mhm,
And those watches, those clocks were the most sophisticated technology they had at the time. And
mm,
obviously now it's a computer. For Freud, it was a steam engine. You get how people pick the most complicated machine they have, and that's the metaphor for what we are and what society is and what the universe is. But we're particularly beholden to a kind of like there's a code of like laws of physics or certain laws that's programmed into a computer that is the world. It's a robot, and we're robots, and there's a bigger robot that we're all a part of or something. And like it's this very robotic thing, very mechanical thing. And I think people really buy into it. So people would say like the reason why you can't have free will is because How could a robot have free will? And we're all robots. Everything's a machine, so everything's mechanistic. So how could anything non-mechanistic exist? And show me the data that there's anything non-mechanistic, meaning you have to posit a mechanistic process that's measurable, that's non-mechanistic. So it's
Mm-hmm.
inherent, like you can't do it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but it's like so it's really a dogma
Mm-hmm.
about the universe being mechanical,
Mm-hmm.
being a machine, and the human psyche being a machine, and human beings being machines. Fundamentally, we're meat machines,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still, you boil it all down, it's all mechanics. And in order to do that, you have to say, I am not making any choices about my life. They're all just happening as pre-programmed things. My consciousness is irrelevant and doesn't mean anything and doesn't impact anything or have any value. There's no difference between living and dead things. Nothing's sacred. It's like you have to negate everything about your humanity in order to make this metaphor work. And I think people are just hypnotized by belief in this metaphor. And when the metaphor fails, rather than saying the metaphor isn't working because it's missing things that are obviously part of who we are, like consciousness and sentience and being alive and making choices. Like those are obviously things that are true about us, but they don't fit into the mechanical worldview. The problem is the mechanical model is failing to fit reality. They go the other way. They say, no, we're those are all illusions. None of them are real because they don't fit the mechanical model.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really sets up a horrifying uh when you start thinking everybody's just a robot, you don't have to honor life. Nothing is
Mm-hmm.
sacred. And it does set up, I think there's a reason why science in particular can sometimes become really horrifying. And it doesn't recognize anything as sacred. And with sex in particular, people have very complicated feelings about sex. I don't think we have time to get into all of that today, but like
Mm-hmm.
every faith-based tradition says there's some connection between how you have sex and your spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on some level, deep down, people understand that when you honor your sexuality and that part of your heart, it's it's part of your connection to the mystery. Those two things are related. Um, but you can't do a study on that. You can't measure that. So people just say, well, I guess sex is meaningless because we can't identify anything of value related to this incredibly profound interpersonal connection that's happening through sexuality. So they're just losing touch with the secrets and mysteries. Um, uh, there's one other thing I want to say that's a little bit tangential around this, which is think about in the ancient world or the medieval world where people would wake up at 4 a.m. and do their ablutions and do their prayers in the pre-dawn hours. Okay. Or go to a place where they would do prayers for an hour, maybe a couple times a day, something like this. You know, it, I think that in our society, we would see that as selfish because we don't know what it is. In reality, if you think about it through the lens of the mystery that we were just talking about, how much good the goodness that you can do in your life comes from your connection to that source. So if you're connected to that, you can do good. But how can you, it's hard to do good without, you can't do good without a connection to that. So nurturing that connection is really essential. It's not just a selfish thing. And what I would think is either it's self-care, it gets pronounced as self-care because it improves your mood, not as like it's a path to becoming a better person. Um, Another is that um, it's like, it's again, it's the mechanistic thing. If I do this, then after I die, I will go to heaven as opposed to hell. And it's this very mechanical thing. I'm doing this for a personal selfish payoff later that I believe in. But there's not a sense of like actively and in the present connecting to a powerful source that can guide you towards goodness and be not only healing to yourself but healing towards to others. And that's the value here of this practice. It's crazy how much our society has totally forgotten, I
Mhm.
think, and lost touch with this stuff. I think even in faith-based communities there, they it's like, why don't people go to church? They don't know why they're going.
Mhm.
Why am I going? Am I going because God wants me to like waste a couple hours a week going to something boring and then sit there and then I'll go to heaven because I did this boring thing? Why? That makes no sense. But it's like, no, you have to be working. Like you do this work. And if you can find somebody who can help guide you on this, it can have a lot of value. Once a week is not enough. Like you have to do this every day. So it's like, but at least once a week.
Mhm.
I mean, but like that's what matters is the so I don't know. I think it's just I'm worried about uh the where things are going, and I think a lot of these problems that you're seeing that seem really disparate, like sex, science, AI, meaning, whatever, they're they're connected to, I think, this kind of central thing. I think it has an
Mhm.
immense power that could have a relation to like mental health crisis and what effective psychotherapy looks like and like issue after issue after issue. I think it's way more like this is where like ultimately like I personally believe like this is where beauty and meaning and art comes from.
Mhm.
Stable, it's the foundation of a stable society. It's the foundation of a harmonious family. It's like you look at every area of society you look at every and it's like this is an important ingredient that's missing.
Mhm.
Um,
As you're talking, I've written down like four different topics I want to bring up.
okay,
So
okay,
I won't do it now. We can branch off. I'll see what you want to
okay,
take on as a total tangent, a separate conversation at a different
okay,
time. But
okay.
one thing that I wonder is what are your thoughts on how religiosity or spirituality has been associated with low intellect? Why is it that we live in a culture now where we do have this embrace of science and data, but that is that's associated with the intellectual mindset and
Yeah.
academics and intelligent people are atheists and religious people must be fools. So where did that come from and how do we turn that around?
That's really interesting. I mean, the benefit of the machine metaphor, it's a good metaphor. It's useful because it gets people thinking precisely about what exactly is happening and what the steps are. It really pushes people to think precisely, which is why I think it's so valuable. And I'm not actually opposed to it as like as long as we remember it's a conceptual model.
Mhm.
Um, we need a metaphor to conceptualize things. The mind has to look at something that the senses can perceive in order to represent abstract things.
Mhm.
So it's like if this is the machine, like it's the light or the ocean or the ghost or whatever, it's not. So we're going to need some type of metaphor in order to even be able to have this conversation. Now that metaphor is ultimately falling short.
Mhm.
Our new metaphor is not it, but
Mhm.
we need something because the mind's limited. But the intellect really is so rooted in these metaphors and language and sensory perception. And so there's an immense faith that people have, especially in the intellectual classes, in the intellect. And it's like, they think their work is all about understanding things through this mechanism. And it's like the mystery, they don't, it's a harder thing to know what to do with. But it does, so I think it's like, and the mystery, the other thing about the mystery is it's silent. Like, I mean, I'm not saying there's a sound within the silence, but there's um there's a great story. I know we need to wrap up. I'll tell one story, which is very, very famous. People know Dostoevsky wrote the story, The Grand Inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov. And are you familiar with this? No.
No, you
Okay.
talked a little bit about, I think, this book a while back, but I don't know what you're
Okay.
about to share.
It was the devil has been incarnated as like an archbishop or a cardinal or something
Mm.
who's running the Spanish Inquisition. And he has like, and Jesus comes to see him. And the archbishop makes all these arguments about like how God made a mistake by allowing people to have free will. People shouldn't have free will because they're going to choose evil and then they're going to suffer because of it. So the devil says, so I'm going to fix that by making them do the right thing. And then I'm helping them. I'm doing what God didn't do by letting them sin. God's hurting them, and I'm fixing it by not letting them sin. And he has these the devil makes this incredibly long, I think actually pretty
Mm.
beautiful argument about like why is there suffering in the world? And he believes in God, but he thinks God is wrong.
Mm.
And Jesus hears this whole story and turns around and walks out and doesn't say anything, you know. And I don't think like if somebody wanted to debate these issues with me, I really think I'd say no. I don't have any interest in debating this
Mm.
because it's like we're fundamentally talking about something that's outside of language and outside of knowledge and is the mystery. And you only are going to connect to that through experience. Nobody's going to find the mystery through debate.
Mhm.
Maybe that's too extreme, but I don't know. You got to go on the journey. And
Mhm.
if you want to go, it's hard to do this. If you don't want to go, there's no chance. I'm
Mhm.
not going to argue you into wanting to go on this journey in a sincere way. And if you agree with some argument I made, you're already on the wrong path now because you're not looking in the right place. You're looking at some argument that logically made sense to you. Even if I
Right.
win, I lose. So I wouldn't debate it
Mhm.
because it's not in that realm. Like debates are all rooted in language and social convention and emotion and ego and all these things that are not conducive to actually connecting to the mystery, which is why my read on that story, that's why like Jesus, what are you gonna you're gonna debate him? You're gonna debate like there's no debate. The truth is just there. Like there's no arguing.
Mhm.
So um so I think that might be part of it, is it's not this isn't in the realm of the intellect.
Mhm.
So the more our society values intellect, words, data, the further it's going to get from the sincere, heartfelt connection to this power.
Mhm.
Um, it's not a data thing. It's not a debate thing. It's not a language thing. It's not a knowledge thing. It's not a
It's
measurable thing.
Yeah, that's really well put. And I think that something I've observed over the past, what, 10 years, I guess, since people have started doing podcasts, and you can hear Jordan Peterson talk or Joe Rogan talk to somebody for a couple of hours, and they just sort of talk about the meaning of life, really, in
Yeah.
all these. It's like a resurgence of philosophers, really, rather than
Yeah.
scientists. And so I wondered kind of at what point did we decide that science was the realm of smart people and philosophy wasn't important? Like we already had it all figured out. And I guess I'm really heartened to see the reemergence of philosophical passion, just exploration.
Yeah, it needs a different vocabulary.
Hmm.
And the vocabulary is a lot of it is myths and parables and symbols
Hmm.
and images and things that have multiple layers of unfolding meaning and are not limited to a simplistic, rational, mechanistic interpretation. And it's a different type of thing. It's not like the other stuff. So, um, I hope that we can find a way to like prioritize and reconnect to this. This is something that ChatGPT can't do.
Hmm.
I really like the mystery, the mystery, the mystery. It's so fundamental to who we are as humans.
When is your book coming out? You said you're
Oh,
almost done with it?
no, I wrote a draft of it and I'm working with the agent. I don't really have time to
Okay.
polish it up the way that I need to.
Hmm.
So I'm maybe gonna like work with another writer to help me get the
Okay.
project done.
Yeah.
One of the challenging things about it is like, do I make the argument in the book in a very systematic way? Because it's
Hmm.
like, it really shouldn't be. It
Hmm.
really should be because I'm not going to measure the borders of the mystery.
Hmm. Yeah, I had and I know we don't have time to get into it right now, but I have had a couple of really profound spiritual experiences that changed my life and my way of looking at everything. I just there's not again, it kind of comes back to what you said about secrets. How do you convey this? I don't know. I don't know how to talk about it simply. But one of the things that I came away with was this sense that I need to share this. But how do you share that? And so I've sat with attempts to write this and everything falls so far short of what I want to communicate that it's really quite
Yeah.
difficult to do.
And sometimes the secrets are just for you.
Hmm.
I don't always think that I totally get the want to share it with other people and want them to have what you had, or see what you were able to see.
Hmm.
But sometimes with secrets and mysteries, there's a reason that they're not written
Hmm.
everywhere. There really is. That's something it's something sacred. It's something for you. It's something to keep in your heart and to know.
Hmm.
And I'm not always a big fan of like talking about all that stuff.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because it's like they're not going to get it intellectually. They have to do the process. Like you
And at the same time, there's something about just showing that this is here, this is possible. When people are so demoralized and lost and bereft of meaning, saying there is something else can have such a profound, you can't communicate what it was because it won't land the way that it landed with you because it was, like you said, it was your experience. It's it's your understanding and maybe there's a reason why it's a secret in that sense. But just like having these conversations and not being afraid to talk about the things that are impossible to quantify
yes.
is a way of signposting that and giving people some hope, I think,
Yes.
for people who are feeling hopeless.
Yes, you can kind of point in
Hmm.
the direction, and then if they want to get out of the cave or have the journey
Hmm.
where they need to, like, they're gonna have to go. Like,
Right.
we're not gonna carry them. They have to do it. But there is something about knowing that this power, like, I do take some things in the Bible literally, like or I take a lot literally, but like this power can bring life to the dead.
Mm.
Like it's like, and it's really something that can not just heal your heart and heal your thoughts, but like heal your blood and your bones and like from your hands to your toes, your organs. You can soak this in, but you need a practice. And it's not something that you just believe in and then you go forget about. Like it's a regular practice. It's like good actions, honesty, sincerity, good qualities, regular practice. And these traditions are incredibly valuable. I
Yeah.
mean, because they have practices that enable people, they give advice and boundaries and practices that can help people do this. And it's worth, trying not to lose them.
Well, thank you so much for delving into this today. Do you
Yeah,
think
thanks for
that
letting me.
there's anything we missed or should be emphasized as we close?
Oh, I mean, it's an endless thing, so we can always
Yeah.
come back to it.
All right. Well, sounds great. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Andrew.
Thanks, Leslie.